Hello, my name is Amritpal Chahal, and for my Capstone project, I'm going to be talking about equitable approaches in the classroom. And here are the table of contents. I'm going to talk about intended audience, introduction, my rationale, guiding questions, what is equity, issues of race, issues of language, implicit bias, strategies, and references. Just to note, my strategies, I'm going to be talking about it throughout my whole presentation, and then I'll just summarize them towards the end. And this PowerPoint will be available linked with my YouTube video as well, and I'll attach it in the description below. Okay, let's start. Okay, my intended audience. The single variable that best predicts students' sense of belonging is their relationship with teachers. This is more important than their race, socioeconomic status, academic achievement, and their relationships with peers. Strong teacher-student relationships can mitigate the cumulative effects of misbehavior, apathy, and failure due to poor teacher-student relationships. So again, right, if we want our students to be successful, we need to put in the work and create those strong relationships with them, right? And so therefore, my intended audience is with teachers, administrators, and education assistants. All right, introduction, like I said, my name is Amritpal Chahal, and I put that in parentheses because my whole life I've always introduced myself as Amritpal Chahal, right? Amritpal. And that's not my real name, and I've never really said it how I pronounce it, how my family pronounces it, my friend pronounces it, because I was just comfortable because my teachers have always said Amrit, and therefore I always thought Amrit would be the way to go, right? So again, my name is Amritpal Chahal. My parents immigrated to BC, Canada in 1993. I was born in Surrey, British Columbia in 1994. I come from a Punjabi Sikh family, and my family is from Punjab, India. I did my K to 12 in the Surrey School District. I finished my Bachelor's of Arts and Bachelor's of Education at SFU. I have been a teacher for 3.5 years. My experiences and perspectives in this presentation will revolve around Surrey, British Columbia. As I am a teacher here, I'm going to pull up some facts about Surrey and really relate how we can push more equity in our schools. Okay, so some facts for you. 1 in 4 Canadians had at least one mother tongue other than English or French. In 2021, 3 racialized groups alone accounted for more than 16.1% of Canada's total population. These groups are South Asians with 2.6 million, right? Chinese with 1.7 million, and blacks as 1.5 million, each with a population of more than 1 million. In 2021, 3 in 10 racialized persons were Canadian born. And another fact, 35.7% of the population reported at least one form of discrimination or unfair treatment. This includes their ethnicity or culture, race or skin color, physical appearance, sex, and age. Right? And this is really, really important because we can assume students entering the public school are beginning to be identified as English language learners at a much higher rate. Our population in our schools is filled with more diverse peoples, and there is still unfair treatment, right, that is happening to them. Okay, and my rationale for this project. Although I am Canadian born, right, I am still a minority. Growing up with brown skin and English as my second language, I felt there was a lack of representation in the media I consumed, and most of my teachers were white. However, there were a handful of educators that were not white, and those are the educators I remember the most. As I reflect on this fact, I realize representation and feeling of belonging were important aspects of my education. As a teacher, I find myself being a fantastic role model to my students, and often I always get a couple of my Punjabi students looking up to me and complimenting my turban. It is important for the staff to be diverse, to reflect the diversity of the students. Therefore, I want to focus on equitable approaches to race and language. I have lived experiences in these categories. I recognize it is important to be equitable in all the categories, and I'll mention those categories in a bit, but it can be overwhelming to discuss these issues in depth in just one short project. However, I will discuss how culture plays an important role in education and how educators can be more equitable in this aspect too. Culture encompasses both race and language. Okay, so first, some guiding questions that guided me in my project. What is equity? How does it relate to education? In what ways do race and language influence equity in education? How can educators recognize and address implicit bias to foster a more equitable classroom environment? What practical strategies can teachers implement to ensure inclusivity and equity in diverse classrooms? And I'm hoping to answer all of this as I continue through my project. Okay, so what is equity? Educational equity means that each child receives what they need to develop to their full academic and social potential. Equity can be broken down into categories by race, disability, socioeconomics, language, sex, gender identity, sexual identity, and religion. As equitable leaders, our main goal is to envision a society in which every person, inclusive of differences, has equitable access to the full and equal application of the rights, citizenships, including safety and security in all their forms, access to a quality and affirming education, the right to self-determination, and plentiful opportunities to pursue happiness. Okay. I think it's really important to differentiate equality versus equity. Equality focuses on uniformity. Everyone has the same starting point, while equity focuses on fairness and addressing individual needs. While by definition, both equity and equality strive to promote fairness and justice, equality as a primary strategy can only work if everyone has the same starting point and the same needs. Equitable practices in education are essential as children, their families, and their teachers are all situated differently from opportunity. As you can see, for an example, in this image right here, right, if everyone gets a single box to stand on, then one person is missing the opportunity to see the game. However, right, if the person on the far right here gets two boxes, right, that means everyone can see the game fairly. Okay, now I want to talk about issues of race and equity. Race is a social construction and has no biological basis, right? And yet, race has the most powerful context for categorizing people. Why is that? And I'm going to talk about that. First, students struggle with racial disparities in academic achievement, representation in curriculum and staff, implicit bias and its impact. I'm going to discuss a little bit more about that after. School discipline and racial disparities, right? Let's talk about the 4 levels of oppression. And I got this amazing diagram at this website called National Equity Project. It's amazing. Please check out that resource. It can be broken down into 4 levels of oppression. First, it's the individual. A person's belief and actions serve to perpetuate oppression. It can be conscious or unconscious, right? It can be systemic, institutional, policies and practices at the organization level that perpetuate oppression. It can be structural, how these interact and accumulate across institutions. And finally, it can be interpersonal. It can be both the interactions between people and both within and across these differences, right? And to give you a little bit of example and context, in the individual level, a teacher consistently favors certain students over others based on personal biases, giving them more attention and opportunities, which affects the learning experience of all students, right? Interpersonally, students from different racial or socioeconomic backgrounds are excluded from social groups or bullied, creating a hostile environment that hampers their ability to engage and succeed in school, right? This is both systemic and individual, right? And finally, at the institutional level, a school district enforces disciplinary policies that disproportionately affect students of color, right? Leading to higher suspension rates for these students compared to their peers, which impacts their academic progress and opportunities. And at the structural level, right, there are systematic disparities in funding between schools in affluent and underprivileged neighborhoods, right, resulting in unequal access to advanced courses, extracurricular activities, and support services which perpetuate educational inequities. Therefore, race is the biggest barrier and needs to be removed to promote equity, right? And we need to be conscious of that. Okay, now I want to talk about issues of language in equity. Language is the bridge that helps people learn and connect through culture. One way or another, people are connected through their language. Language equity in schools is essential to ensure that all children have equal opportunities to prosper and thrive regardless of their linguistic background, right? Students usually struggle with language barriers, more specifically students who are English language learners, lack of representation in the curriculum, language bias, and discrimination. A struggle that has been highlighted through research is the difficulties that students face when speaking more than one language daily. Sharma cites multiple researchers about the struggle of multilingual homes. She states research studies by Clarkson, Maddie, and Garbardi provides examples of the tensions between the use of home and school language. Thus, switching between language can add an extra layer of challenge to language learners as they find themselves working between a multitude of registers in both the medium of instructions and their home language. Now, I'm going to want to give you another example of here in British Columbia in 2020. A researcher, Amritpal, conducted a research study examining school experiences of second-generation Canadian Punjabi Sikh students in British Columbia. Saul suggests that one challenge this group faced was the lack of curricular or extracurricular connections to their culture in schools. As a result, many students felt disconnected from their cultural heritage despite growing up in a diverse area. This lack of cultural representation can lead to feelings of not belonging or not being understood with the school environment. In this study, second generation Canadians, right, of grade 11 and 12 students had a greater perceived satisfaction in schools experience where their culture was integrated into learning in the curriculum, where they felt teachers try to understand their culture, where their cultural traditions were celebrated, where their heritage and language was recognized through course offerings, where translation services were offered to their parents, where there were opportunities for further extracurricular engagement with their culture. So they had a big success there when these changes were made. An important intervention for teachers is to integrate culturally relevant curriculum. By incorporating more diverse curriculum, it offers diverse perspectives and experiences of the people that are being represented in Canada, and engages these students. All right, I want to talk about implicit bias. Implicit bias are unconscious attitudes or stereotypes that can affect behaviors and decisions in ways that perpetuate inequities. As a fairly new educator teaching in elementary school, I found myself reflecting on my own practices. I find myself questioning whether I am unconsciously biased and how can I become better for my students. However, everyone has an unconscious bias, right? In fact, science has concluded inarguably that everyone carries unconscious biases. These kinds of unconscious biases contribute to negative judgment, exclusion, and discrimination. Therefore, I believe inequities within ourselves often come through an unconscious bias. However, we do not mean to unfairly treat or give unequal opportunities to students based on their background, but it happens way too often. It is important to acknowledge biases and also consistently reflect and be open to all perspectives. For example, this past school year, I had a refugee student from Afghanistan in my classroom. This was his first time entering grade 7, and he's never ever went to school in Afghanistan, right? And I could, reflecting on it back, he's made amazing strides. He started speaking from zero English to conversational to reading and writing all within a year. And that was because I tried my best to create a positive relationship with him. I had to create a whole new curriculum for him to catch up, but I see how happy he is to interact with his friends and join in on projects and assignments without being frustrated that he does not understand them. My initial thoughts of this child were that, oh no, this is going to be a tough year for him to catch up, and he will struggle a lot. But honestly, reflecting back, this year, he has come a long way. And I'm glad I never let my initial biases affect me. When talking to other teachers, I found my perspective shift, and I became more empathetic to students when I get to know their full story. I think this is why doing an identity unit is so powerful, as it allows everyone to understand each and other's perspectives and eliminates those initial biases. Okay, I want you all to remember, acknowledgement of biases will lead to action, right? When you're consciously acknowledging that you have a bias, right, it will lead you to a more positive route, right? And tools that will help you kind of understand your biases is actually doing an implicit bias test, right? It's not as 100% as accurate, but it kind of helps open that up to reflect on yourself, right? I took this implicit bias test. I have this link right here, and my results showed that I was more moderately faster at sorting white people with bad and black people with good than black people with bad and white people with good. And I realized I'm in the minority of these results right here, right? A majority sorted moderately faster at sorting white with good. There's a lot more other implicit bias tests, right? And I just took the racial one. Another one that is super important is this one called flower power. It's a privilege tool, right? The outer rings right here represent the privilege you have in these categories, and the inner rings right here represents you don't have privilege, right? So for example, my gender, right? I have a huge privilege on my gender. I'm a male, right? In this society, I do have privilege, right? And this visual representation really opened my eyes and allowed me to actually understand my privilege. I feel as if a lot of us, including me, forget that power and privilege are not about race, but multiple categories that create our social identity. Right? I always consider myself not having power and privilege because I grew up with my parents who immigrated to Canada and started a family here in a lower income household. However, I do have the privilege of my gender, current geographic region, status as a Canadian citizen, education, and now socioeconomic class. Furthermore, I would like to acknowledge the balance of being in between these categories. Also, when referring to my personal identity, I never considered being able-bodied a privilege until I realized how hard it is for someone who has a disability. I've always been a strong believer in understanding multiple perspectives, but sometimes I find myself so stuck in my own world and perspective that I forget to be mindful of others around me and challenges they faced, and not just my own, right? If we're acknowledging our biases, our privilege, that leads to action, right? And that leads to more equitable practice. Okay, now I want to talk about some strategies. And the first strategy to be more equitable in our classroom, in our environment, right, is changing your mindset. As previously mentioned, it is important to acknowledge your biases and privilege because your personal awareness leads to more action. Whitaker argues that cultivating a school climate for equity requires careful attention to the creation of emotional, cognitive, and behavioral spaces throughout the school, right? This means creating a positive school environment by changing your mindset. How can I do this? By framing your mindset and trying to change yourself and the school environment, think about it in these three lenses. The first is the habit of heart. Your core values. Why do you teach? I said this before, but I believe in representation. It is so important and students need to feel that they are heard and valued. I try my best to integrate diverse perspectives into the curriculum, ensuring that all students see themselves reflected in what they learn. As well, I want to address any biases or stereotypes that arise in classroom discussions. The second lens I want you to think about is habits of head, ways of thinking and knowing. What do you believe? I believe in the process of making mistakes. I try to model growth mindset by sharing my learning journey with students and showing that making mistakes is a part of the process. I try to encourage students to take risks and explore new ideas without having those high stakes like failing in mind. And finally, the third lens, habit of hand, action and practices. How do you practice your values and beliefs? I implement differentiated instructions to meet diverse needs of my students. As well, I use a variety of teaching methods to ensure that all students can access the material and demonstrate their learning in different ways. For example, for a new ELL student, I had them listen to the audiobook of Harry Potter in Arabic, while others read or listened to the book in English, right? Just by making this simple switch, I knew my ELL learner can connect to the material, can tell me the elements of the story, but in his own language, right, where he felt more comfortable. Another example, I try to foster a more collaborative learning environment where students work together on projects, they inquire about their learning, share ideas, and learn from one another. Creating a school community environment where students feel they are valued and heard is so important. Remember, the goal is to foster students' motivation to perform to their best abilities by creating an environment where they want to be there, where they see a purpose in believing, purpose in being, and where they experience success. For my second strategy to promote equity, first and foremost, a lot of newly immigrated students face challenges such as lack of familiarity with societal norms, language barriers, difference in teacher expectations, difficulty with peer relationships, and bullying. And to help mitigate this, have the whole community involved, right? Engage the community, the importance of community empowerment that leads to community involvement. I firmly believe schools should not just focus on academics success of the students, but how the student and their families can be successful in the community. An article by Leo in 2018 argued that family engagement has been linked to numerous positive outcomes, including improved academic achievement, attendance, homework completion, and student motivation, as well lower rates of dropout. Furthermore, not every family can make time due to busy work schedules, or some families lack the confidence to speak English. And I think that is why it's important to try to find a workaround to incorporate those families, to engage families. I think it's important to understand the school community. A majority of my families in my school in Surrey are South Asian Punjabi speaking families. However, there are a lot of diverse pockets of culture in my school community as well, right? A good strategy to keep all families engaged would be hosting welcoming events and regular school or days or night events for families to interact with the school community. As well, having expert language specialists to help families bond with each other and the school would be awesome. I know a lot of families who speak Punjabi, Hindu, Urdu, Tagalog, Mandarin, and many more would benefit from this type of community engagement. So how do you reach these families? How can you communicate this to families? Well, one way is to encourage families to join the Parental Advisory Committee, right? Their PAC, so their voices and concerns are heard and valued. Another strategy is creating a monthly school community newsletter, right? And this can be done by your admin team or teacher, right? And it can also be translated, right, in various languages, right? That reflects the diversity of your school, right? So, for example, right here, I wrote one for my school back in March. This newsletter helps keeps families in the loop and allows more opportunities to interact with the community. As you can see, we had a family fun night, right? I talked about PAC news. I gave some resources, and yeah. For the third strategy, look at the curriculum you are currently teaching, right? Integrate culture, language, race into the curriculum that represents the diverse students in your classroom, right? For example, be very, very intentional about the literature you choose, right? This past school year, I chose Wenjack by Joseph Boyden. I chose Becoming Muhammad Ali by James Patterson. I chose The Breadwinner by Deborah Ellis, right? And I also chose a short story by Fulja Singh that keeps going. And those books and short stories represented um, a lot of my students in my classroom. And your curriculum should be changing based on those diverse peoples in your classroom, right? I really, really want to emphasize that. Change your curriculum that helps meet the needs for your students, because every year it's going to be different, right? An example about this book right here, Fauja Singh Keeps Going. This book was written by Simranjeet Singh, right? It's based on a true story that has all the elements of a Punjabi Sikh student will authentically feel engaged with. This book has themes of perseverance, accomplishing goals, positive role models, and dealing with discrimination. This is a great resource to lead to an honest discussion about these themes in the book, right? That everyone can connect to. I also wanted to mention that I mentioned this earlier. Create an identity unit, right? That allows students to explore who they are, right? And that way they can really understand themselves, and they can feel valued and listened to. And I think it's a very, very awesome thing to do. It's very simple, but it's so powerful, and you get to understand your students' perspective. And I really, really strongly suggest you try to do this early on in the year. As well, change your curriculum based on your students as well. So for example, if you're talking about ancient civilizations, right, but you have an ELL student, right, who is still learning English, right, try to get them involved, right? I had this ELL student. He wanted to research his homeland rather than doing ancient civilizations. So we sat together and researched. I helped him write down his thinking, and I could see how excited and engaged he was to learn about his homeland. Therefore, I find it is important to create opportunities for students to share their perspectives, experiences in the classroom, because it gives students a voice, right? Okay. Fourthly, I said this again, instruction, right? Differentiate your instruction for diverse learners, right? I think this one is very, very important, right? There should be so many ways that you can allow students to be successful, right? As mentioned before, right? If a student is struggling with understanding English, right? Give them an audiobook that can be translated, right, to their language. Find digital literacy apps that will help them be more engaged. And that's all about differentiating your instruction and still meeting their needs, their unique needs. And as well, teacher expectation of students has to be reasonable, right? You have to, the result will be worth the effort, right? Please, please, please. Students and staff should not be given busy work, be overworked, or be asked to do things which they are not capable of doing, right? Please be reasonable, and then they will respond in kind. Okay, for my last strategy is I encourage you all to look at your district programs and policy. What type of programs are being offered that can meet the needs of everyone in an equitable manner, right? So for example, right, Surrey Schools offers a variety of specialized and choice programs for students. More specifically, Surrey Schools offers learning the Punjabi language from grades 5 to 11 as an alternative to taking French and meeting the second language curriculum. Students begin their study of Punjabi in grade 5 and remain in the program till grade 8. As well, senior Punjabi classes for grades 11 and 12 are offered to further advance fluency. These are just at some specific schools where majority of the students are Punjabi speaking, right? However, there's no other language programs in Surrey. Like, for example, Surrey Schools could do more language that reflects their community. For example, I know there are schools that have a heavily have families that speak more Mandarin, and there's no Mandarin language programs available. And I think that's what our district needs to look at, right? More language programs, because this is so important, right? Finally, check your school policy on racial equity. Remember, policies that are one size fit all are not equitable. As well, policies are not law, right? They can be changed, right, to meet more equitable needs, right? Is your district sticking with their racial equity? I want you to ask yourself that. How are they moving forward with equity? Is there any progress being made? In Surrey schools, right, their vision is to collectively strengthen work and learning environments that are culturally responsive, celebrate diversity, and strive to ensure belonging to everyone. Now, that's great in theory, right? And just looking at their plan on their website, um, they want to strengthen culturally responsive policies. They want to strengthen racial equity and diversity and belonging in schools and the workplace. They want to do more culturally affirming initiatives, and they want to communicate this more efficiently, and they want to understand students and staff through data and research. So they have all these things in mind. Are they doing it, right? And I think I'm a teacher, so I should be asking, right, my administrative lead, my district lead, and I will be asking this in September, right, just to follow up, because I want to be an equity lead, right? I want to have my classroom environment, my school environment, my community environment, right, reflect the diversity, right? So that is my project. Thank you so much, right? Hopefully I got across what I wanted to say. And I just wanted to say the book I'm currently reading is this book called The Public School Equity. It's Educational Leadership for Justice. I just ordered it on Amazon, and I'm looking forward to it because I really connected with this author, and they said some amazing things, and that really got me thinking in more of that equity leadership in education, right? Here are my references as well. I had to just screenshot them because they were not formatting right. And I will have this slideshow in the description of the YouTube video. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you listening. Have a wonderful, amazing day. And remember, you can always, there's going to be closed captions on this YouTube video. There's going to be timestamps, so you can always skip forward and back, whatever you want to do. Okay, bye-bye.